Officer confiscates Black Marine's medal. General's visit changes everything. The old Marine's weathered hands trembled as the security officer ripped the Medal of Honor from his uniform jacket. A small crowd had gathered in the airport security checkpoint, shocked whispers rippling through the onlookers. "Sir, I've explained this 3 times. You cannot take this through security," the young officer said, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "It's flagged in our system as a potential weapon." Colonel James Wilson, at 78 years old, stood ramrod straight despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "Young man, that medal was given to me by President Johnson himself. 57 years I've carried it. It's not a weapon, it's the highest military honor in this nation." The security officer slipped the medal into a plastic bin. "Rules are rules, sir. You'll need to check it or surrender it." Wilson's grandson stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you even know what that medal means? Do you know what he did to earn it?" A distinguished man in a crisp uniform emerged from the crowd. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. The entire security team snapped to attention as General Raymond Harris approached, his eyes taking in the scene. "What seems to be the problem here?" the general asked quietly. The security officer swallowed hard. "Sir, this passenger was attempting to bring a metal object through security." "Protocol states." General Harris raised his hand, silencing the officer. He looked at Colonel Wilson, then at the Medal of Honor in the plastic bin. His eyes widened in recognition. "My God," he whispered. "You're James Wilson, Kisan 1968. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Colonel James Wilson was preparing for what might be his last major journey. Colonel Wilson adjusted his dress blues in the mirror of his modest apartment. The uniform still fit well, though perhaps a bit looser now than in his prime. At 78, his once powerful frame had diminished, but his posture remained impeccable. Once a Marine, always a Marine. "Grandpa, are you sure you want to wear the full uniform?" Michael asked, leaning against the doorframe. At 28, Michael was the spitting image of James in his youth, though he'd chosen college and a career in engineering rather than military service. "It's a long flight to Washington." James carefully pinned the Medal of Honor to his jacket, his fingers moving with practiced precision. "This might be my last time attending a Marine Corps birthday celebration at the White House, son. I'm going properly or not at all." The medal caught the morning light, the blue ribbon and gold star still vibrant despite the decades since President Johnson had placed it around his neck. James remembered that day clearly, how he'd stood at attention, trying not to think about the friends who hadn't made it back from that hellish night in Vietnam. "Besides," James continued, "wearing this reminds people that Black Marines served with distinction too, even when the country wasn't always fair to us. History gets forgotten if we don't wear it proudly." Michael smiled and nodded. His grandfather had been sharing these stories more frequently lately, perhaps sensing the urgency of passing them along before time ran out. "Your grandmother would be proud," Michael said, picking up James's small suitcase. "She always did love seeing you in uniform." James touched the wedding band he still wore 15 years after Elaine's passing. "That she did. Said I looked almost as handsome as the day we met at that USO dance in '67. The ride to Nashville International Airport was filled with Michael's gentle reminders, medication schedules, phone chargers, the details of their hotel reservation in D.C. James let his grandson fuss, knowing it came from love, though he'd navigated far more dangerous situations than air travel in his lifetime. "I'm not senile yet, son," James chuckled as they pulled into the airport drop-off zone. "I still remember how to make it through an airport." Michael grinned. "I know, Grandpa. But Mom would kill me if I didn't make sure you had everything." As they walked through the terminal, James noticed the glances. Some were respectful nods from those who recognized his uniform and understood its significance. Others were merely curious. A distinguished elderly Black man in full Marine dress blues wasn't something you saw every day in Nashville. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, stared openly as they passed. "Mommy, is that a soldier?" she asked loudly. Before her mother could answer, James smiled and gently corrected, "Marine, young lady. Once a Marine, always a Marine." The girl's mother, embarrassed, offered an apologetic smile, but James waved it away. "No harm done. It's good for kids to ask questions." At the security checkpoint, Michael hesitated. "Grandpa, maybe we should have packed your medal. TSA can be funny about metal objects." James straightened his shoulders. "I've worn this through dozens of airports, son. Never had a problem yet." The first sign of trouble came when James placed his personal items in the plastic bin: wallet, keys, watch, but kept his uniform jacket on as he prepared to walk through the metal detector. The TSA agent, a young man whose name tag read Officer Daniels, pointed to James's chest. Sir, you'll need to remove any metal objects, including any pins or medals. This is a Medal of Honor, son, James explained calmly. I've never had to remove it before. Officer Daniels shook his head. New protocols, sir. Everything metal needs to come off. James felt a flicker of indignation but kept his voice measured. This medal was given to me by the President of the United States for service in Vietnam. It's not something that should be tossed in a plastic bin. By now, several other travelers had paused, watching the exchange. Michael stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. Officer, is there perhaps a supervisor we could speak with? This medal has significant historical and personal value. Officer Daniels, perhaps feeling challenged by the growing attention, stood firmer. Sir, everyone goes through the same security process. The rules don't change based on what the metal object is. James placed a calming hand on his grandson's arm. It's all right, Michael. With careful movements, he unpinned the Medal of Honor and placed it in the bin, then walked through the metal detector without incident. On the other side, James reached for his belongings, only to see Officer Daniels holding the medal up to the light, examining it with suspicious eyes. Is there a problem? James asked, extending his hand for the medal. This will need additional screening, Officer Daniels replied. The shape and density are flagged in our system. Michael's patience was wearing thin. It's a Medal of Honor. It's literally from the United States government. Sir, I need you to step back, Officer Daniels said firmly. Raising your voice won't help the situation. James felt a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with his age. He'd faced discrimination throughout his life and career, subtle looks, denied promotions, neighborhoods where he wasn't welcome. But having his nation's highest military honor treated like contraband cut deeply. Young man, James said quietly, that medal was pinned on me after I carried 3 wounded Marines through enemy fire. I've worn it to meet 4 presidents. I'd appreciate if you'd treat it with the respect it deserves. Officer Daniels seemed unmoved. I need to check if items like this are permitted through security. Please wait while I consult with my supervisor. As Daniels walked away with the medal still in hand, Michael fumed. This is ridiculous, Grandpa. He has no right. Patience, son, James counseled, though his own was being tested. Getting angry won't solve anything. Minutes ticked by, the line of travelers building behind them. James stood at parade rest, his face composed despite the embarrassment of being held up as if he were a security threat. Some passengers made impatient noises, others looked on with sympathy. When Officer Daniels returned, his supervisor wasn't with him, but his demeanor had hardened. Sir, items that could be used as weapons cannot go through security. You'll need to check this or surrender it. James blinked in disbelief. Used as a weapon, it's a metal. It has pointed edges and metal components, Daniels replied mechanically. Those are the rules. Michael could contain himself no longer. That's absurd. It's 3 inches across and weighs nothing. He's a decorated Marine veteran. Sir, if you continue to disrupt security procedures, I'll have to call for assistance, Daniels warned. Other TSA agents were now watching, some looking uncomfortable with the situation, but none intervening. James felt the familiar weight of being singled out, of rules being applied differently to him. After a lifetime of such moments, he recognized it instantly. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, James said, his voice quiet but firm. He's unavailable, Daniels replied. Sir, you have 2 options. Check the item or surrender it. The surrounding passengers were now openly watching, phones discreetly recording the encounter. James stood dignified in his perfectly pressed uniform, now missing its most significant decoration. Young man, James said, his voice steady despite the anger and hurt coursing through him, that medal was given to me by President Johnson himself. 57 years I've carried it. It's not a weapon. It's the highest military honor in this nation. Daniels slipped the medal into a plastic bin. Rules are rules, sir. You'll need to check it or surrender it. Michael stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. Do you even know what that medal means? Do you know what he did to earn it? A distinguished man in a crisp uniform emerged from the crowd. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. The entire security team snapped to attention as General Raymond Harris approached, his eyes taking in the scene. What seems to be the problem here? The general asked quietly. The security officer swallowed hard. Sir, this passenger was attempting to bring a metal object through security. Protocol states. General Harris raised his hand, silencing the officer. He looked at Colonel Wilson, then at the Medal of Honor in the plastic bin. His eyes widened in recognition. My God, he whispered. You're James Wilson, Kisan 1968. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. The security checkpoint fell silent. Officer Daniels looked between the general and James, confusion evident on his face. General Harris turned to the security officer, his voice controlled but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "Officer, do you understand what you're holding? That's a Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration our country bestows." "Sir, our protocols for metal objects," Daniels began. "Let me be clear," General Harris interrupted. "That medal was awarded by Congress and the President of the United States to Colonel Wilson for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. It is not, under any circumstances, to be treated as a security risk." The general turned to James, offering a crisp salute. "Colonel Wilson, it's an honor, sir. Raymond Harris, Marine Corps. Your actions at Key San were part of my training curriculum at Annapolis." James returned the salute, his composure intact despite the ordeal. "Thank you, General. Appreciate the assistance." By now, the TSA supervisor had arrived, quickly assessing the situation. "General Harris, I apologize for any misunderstanding. Of course, the Medal of Honor is permitted through security." The supervisor retrieved the medal from the bin, handling it with newfound reverence, and personally handed it to James. "Colonel, please accept our deepest apologies." James took the medal, examining it carefully before responding. "Thank you. I believe we can all move forward now." General Harris wasn't so quick to let the matter drop. "I'd like a word with you afterward," he told the supervisor. Then turning to James and Michael, "Colonel, are you headed to Washington for the Marine Corps celebration?" James nodded. "Yes, General, probably my last one." "We're on the same flight then," General Harris smiled. "I'd be honored if you join me in first class. I have some colleagues who would be very interested in meeting you." As they walked away from the checkpoint, Michael carrying their belongings, the young man couldn't contain his curiosity. "General Harris, how did you recognize my grandfather?" The general smiled. "Every Marine officer worth his salt knows the story of James Wilson at Key San. February 23, 1968, one of the worst nights of the siege." James looked down modestly. "Just did what needed doing, General." "With respect, Colonel, saving 3 men while wounded yourself, then holding off an enemy advance single-handedly. That's a bit more than what needed doing." Once they were settled at the gate, General Harris's aide brought coffee for everyone. The general studied James with evident respect. "Colonel, I hope you don't mind my asking, but after what I witnessed back there, was that an isolated incident or have you experienced similar problems before?" James sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Let's just say that uniform didn't always shield me from certain attitudes, General, not in 1967 and sometimes not today either." "I assumed as much," General Harris nodded grimly. "Things have improved since you served, but clearly not enough." Michael, still simmering from the encounter, added, "It's not just about the medal, it's about respect. My grandfather deserves better." "That he does," agreed the general. "Which is why I'd like to hear more about your service, Colonel. The official records tell one story, but I'd value hearing yours." James set down his coffee cup. For a moment he seemed hesitant, as if deciding how much to share. Then, with the practiced ease of a man who had told war stories before, selectively, carefully, he began to speak. "I enlisted in 1966. Not many options for a young black man from South Memphis back then. The Marines weren't exactly welcoming, but they were taking anyone willing to fight." General Harris nodded, understanding the unspoken history of discrimination that James was referencing. "By '68, I was a staff sergeant with the 26th Marines at Key San. The siege had been going on for weeks. We were surrounded, taking artillery fire daily, running low on everything. The night of February 23rd, we were hit hard on the perimeter." James paused, his eyes distant. Michael realized he'd never heard the full story, only pieces shared over the years. "My platoon was defending the southeastern corner. NVA came in waves. In the middle of it, a shell hit near our position. 3 men down, badly wounded, and we were about to be overrun. I could see the enemy advancing through the smoke." The boarding area had grown quiet, nearby passengers listening respectfully to the aging Marine's story. "I got the wounded men to cover one by one. Took some shrapnel in my leg during the second trip, but there wasn't time to worry about that." The third man was Corporal David Miller, unconscious about 50 yards out. "I remember thinking he looked so young, just a kid, really." James rubbed his knee absently, perhaps feeling the phantom pain of an old wound. "After I got Miller to safety, I realized the enemy was about to flank our position. Our radio was hit, couldn't call for support. So I took a machine gun and held the line until reinforcements arrived." He delivered this extraordinary feat with such modesty that it might have been a story about fixing a flat tire rather than an act of extraordinary heroism. "I was just lucky. Right place, right time," James concluded. General Harris shook his head. "That's not how the citation reads, Colonel. Conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. You saved your entire unit that night. James looked uncomfortable with the praise. Plenty of brave men never got medals, General, some because their actions weren't witnessed by the right people, others because of the color of their skin. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. For every James Wilson who received recognition despite the racial barriers of the time, how many others had their heroism go unacknowledged? That's a hard truth, Colonel, General Harris acknowledged. One the Corps is still reckoning with. Their conversation was interrupted by the boarding announcement. As promised, General Harris had arranged for James to join him in first class, an experience the older Marine accepted with dignity but clear appreciation. Once settled on the plane, James carefully repinned his Medal of Honor to his uniform. Michael, before heading back to his original seat in economy, leaned down to his grandfather. "I'm proud of you, Grandpa, not just for what you did back then, but for how you handled yourself today." James squeezed his grandson's hand. "Dignity, Michael. That's something no one can take from you unless you let them." As the flight reached cruising altitude, General Harris introduced James to his staff, all of whom treated the elderly Medal of Honor recipient with profound respect. The general then shared something unexpected. "Colonel Wilson, the reason I recognized you immediately wasn't just from military history. David Miller was my uncle." James stared at the general in shock. "Corporal Miller was your uncle?" General Harris nodded, emotion evident in his eyes. "Yes, sir. He died in 1998, but he told me your story many times growing up. Said he owed his life to a brave Marine who carried him through hell that night at Kisan. You're the reason I joined the Corps." For perhaps the first time that day, James was at a loss for words. "My family has wanted to thank you properly for 50 years, the general continued. "Uncle David said you visited him in the hospital once, but with all the chaos of war, he never saw you again afterward." James remembered the young corporal, bandaged and barely conscious in the field hospital. "I shipped out to another assignment soon after, never knew what became of him. He came home, went to college on the GI Bill, became a teacher, married my Aunt Sheila and had 3 children. A good life, all because of you." James swallowed hard, visibly moved. That's good to hear, General. He kept track of you, you know. Read about your Medal of Honor in the papers. Always said the right man got recognized that day." The conversation continued throughout the flight, decades of separate lives connected by a single night of chaos and courage. James learned that Miller had kept a newspaper clipping about the medal ceremony in his wallet for years. In turn, he shared stories about the 26th Marines that didn't make it into official histories, the camaraderie that sometimes transcended the racial divisions of the era, the small human moments amid the horror of war. As they began their descent into Washington, General Harris made an unexpected proposal. "Colonel, I know you're here for the Marine Corps birthday celebration, but I'd like to invite you to speak at the Naval Academy next week. Our midshipmen would benefit greatly from hearing your story directly." James looked surprised. "That's kind of you, General, but I'm just an old Marine with some old stories." "Those stories matter, Colonel, especially coming from you. The Academy is working to build a more diverse officer corps. Seeing a hero who looks like them, that makes a difference to young people of color considering military service." Michael, who had returned to check on his grandfather before landing, caught the end of the conversation. "You should do it, Grandpa. You always said history gets forgotten if we don't share it." James considered this, then nodded slowly. "If you think it would help, General, I'd be honored." The plane touched down at Reagan National Airport, and as they deplaned, James noticed a small commotion near the gate. A group of Marines in dress blues stood at attention, forming an impromptu honor guard. General Harris smiled at James's confusion. "I made a few calls during the flight. Thought you deserved a proper welcome to Washington." As James walked through the terminal, the Marines saluted sharply. Nearby travelers, understanding something significant was happening, stopped to watch. Some veterans among them rendered their own salutes. At the baggage claim, a news crew was waiting. General Harris had apparently alerted the media about the airport incident and James's presence in Washington. "Colonel, would you mind?" the general asked, gesturing to the reporters. "What happened today shouldn't have, and people should know both about that and about your service." James hesitated. He never sought the spotlight, even when receiving the nation's highest military honor. But he understood the importance of visibility, of younger generations seeing that black veterans had played crucial roles in American military history. "All right, General, but you're doing most of the talking." The interview was brief but powerful. General Harris recounted the security checkpoint incident with diplomatic but unmistakable disapproval, while James spoke modestly about his service and the significance of the Medal of Honor. When asked how he felt about his treatment at the Nashville airport, James answered with characteristic dignity, "Misunderstandings happen. What matters is how we learn from them. That young officer was doing his job as he understood it." Perhaps this can be a teaching moment about recognizing the Medal of Honor and what it represents. The reporter pressed, "But do you think your race played a role in how you were treated?" James paused thoughtfully before answering. "I've worn this uniform through times when my country didn't always treat people who looked like me as full citizens. I've seen progress in my lifetime, tremendous progress. But are we finished?" "No, ma'am, I don't believe we are." After the interview, as they waited for their hotel transportation, Michael pulled up social media on his phone. "Grandpa, you're trending. Someone at the security checkpoint posted a video." James shook his head, bemused by the concept. "Trending? At my age?" The footage showed the confrontation from a passenger's perspective. James standing tall in his uniform while Officer Daniels held the Medal of Honor as if it were contraband. General Harris's intervention. The TSA supervisor's apology. Comments were flooding in, most expressing outrage at James's treatment and admiration for his composure. "Well," James said with a small smile, "your mother always warned me about ending up on the internet." At the hotel, they were surprised to find the manager waiting to greet them personally. "Colonel Wilson, General Harris, we're honored to have you staying with us. We've upgraded you both to our presidential suite." James tried to decline the special treatment, but the manager insisted. "Please, sir, it's our privilege." The suite was luxurious beyond anything James would have booked for himself, spacious rooms with panoramic views of the Washington Monument and the National Mall. Michael whistled appreciatively as he set down their luggage. "Quite a change from how the day started, isn't it, Grandpa?" James nodded, looking out at the capital city glowing in the evening light. "Life takes unexpected turns, son." That evening, they dined in the hotel restaurant with General Harris and several senior Marine Corps officers who had heard about the airport incident and wanted to pay their respects to James. The conversation flowed easily, spanning decades of Marine Corps history and shared experiences. One colonel, a black woman in her 50s, approached James privately during the dinner. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. Men like you made it possible for people like me to serve. My father was a Marine in Vietnam too, never got the recognition he deserved. Seeing you honored matters." Later, as James prepared for bed, Michael noticed his grandfather seemed pensive. "Everything okay, Grandpa?" James sat on the edge of the bed, his Medal of Honor resting on the nightstand. "Just thinking about how different today could have been if General Harris hadn't been there." "But he was," Michael said, "and now everyone knows your story." "Not just my story," James corrected gently. "There were many others who did extraordinary things and never got recognized. Today made me think of them." The next morning brought another surprise. The hotel room phone rang early, and Michael answered it groggily. "Mr. Wilson, this is White House security. The president would like to invite Colonel James Wilson to a private meeting before the Marine Corps celebration this afternoon." Michael relayed the message to his grandfather, who received the news with characteristic composure. "Well, I'd better press my uniform again." The White House meeting was brief but meaningful. The president welcomed James in the Oval Office, apologizing personally for the airport incident and thanking him for his service. "Colonel Wilson, men like you helped shape this nation for the better," the president said, shaking James's hand for the photographers. "Your dignity in the face of disrespect yesterday speaks volumes about your character." "Thank you, Mr. President," James replied simply. "I've been fortunate to see much change in my lifetime." "Not just see it, you helped create it," the president corrected. "Your generation's sacrifices opened doors for those who followed." After the White House visit, the Marine Corps birthday celebration at the Washington Navy Yard took on special significance. James, now recognized by many from the viral video and news coverage, found himself receiving a standing ovation when he entered the hall. General Harris, who had become a steady companion throughout this unexpected journey, stood beside him. "They're honoring you, Colonel. You've earned it." Throughout the evening, Marines of all ages and backgrounds approached James to shake his hand and express their respect. Some brought challenge coins to exchange with him, a military tradition of recognition and brotherhood. Others simply wanted to thank him for his composure and dignity during the airport incident. A young black lieutenant approached with particular reverence. "Sir, I grew up in Memphis too. My grandfather used to tell me about a Medal of Honor recipient from our neighborhood. I never thought I'd actually meet you." As the celebration wound down, General Harris made an announcement that caught James by surprise. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to inform you that the Marine Corps has decided to establish the Colonel James Wilson Award for Courage Under Fire, to be presented annually to an enlisted Marine who demonstrates exceptional valor in combat conditions. The room erupted in applause. James, overwhelmed by the recognition, stood with dignity as the assembled Marines raised their glasses in his honor. Afterward, in a quiet moment, James confessed to Michael, "This is more attention than I ever wanted, son." Michael smiled at his grandfather. "Maybe it's exactly the attention you deserve, Grandpa, and maybe it's not just about you. It's about all those others you mentioned, the ones who never got their recognition." The following day brought another surprise. The TSA administrator had flown to Washington personally to meet with James and offer an official apology. The meeting, held in General Harris's office at the Pentagon, was straightforward and respectful. "Colonel Wilson, on behalf of the Transportation Security Administration, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the incident in Nashville," the administrator said. "It represents a failure of training and judgment." James accepted the apology graciously. "Thank you. I hope this can lead to better training about military decorations and their significance." "It already has," the administrator assured him. "As of this morning, we've implemented emergency guidance to all TSA officers nationwide regarding proper handling of military medals, particularly the Medal of Honor. We're also developing a more comprehensive training module featuring your story, with your permission." James nodded. "If it helps prevent similar situations for other veterans, you have my permission." The administrator then revealed another dimension to the situation. "Our investigation revealed that Officer Daniels had received warnings before about his conduct toward minority travelers. He's been placed on administrative leave pending further review." James received this news with mixed emotions. "I don't want the young man's career destroyed over this." "This isn't just about you, Colonel," the administrator explained. "It's about a pattern of behavior that doesn't reflect our values or standards." After the meeting, as they walked through the Pentagon corridors, General Harris observed, "You're very forgiving, Colonel." "Not always," James admitted, "but I've seen what bitterness does to a man over time. I choose not to carry that weight." Their final day in Washington brought the fulfillment of General Harris's invitation. James addressed a hall full of midshipmen at the Naval Academy, sharing not just the story of Key Sand but the broader context of his service. The challenges of being a black Marine during the Vietnam era, the progress he'd witnessed, and the work still to be done. The midshipmen listened in rapt attention as James spoke of duty, sacrifice, and the ongoing journey toward a military that truly reflected the nation it served. "The medal I wear isn't just about one night in Vietnam," he told them. "It represents all those who served alongside me, especially those who never came home, and those whose courage went unrecognized because of what they looked like or where they came from." In the audience, Michael watched with pride as his grandfather's words resonated with these future officers. He noticed particularly how the midshipmen of color seemed to lean forward, seeing in James a reflection of possibilities for themselves. After the speech, during the question and answer session, one young woman raised her hand. "Sir, after what happened at the airport, do you ever feel discouraged about how much progress we've really made?" James considered the question carefully. "Young lady, when I joined the Marines in 1966, segregation was still fresh in memory. The Civil Rights Act was barely 2 years old. I served under officers who didn't believe men like me belonged in the Corps." He gestured around the diverse audience. "Look at this room today. That's progress. Is it perfect? No, the work continues, but don't let anyone tell you we haven't come far." Another midshipman asked, "Sir, what would you say to Officer Daniels if you could speak to him again?" James didn't hesitate. "I'd tell him that uniform I wear and this medal I carry are part of our shared American story. When he respects them, he honors not just me, but the principles we're all sworn to uphold, principles that are bigger than any one of us." As they left Annapolis that afternoon, James seemed content in a way Michael hadn't seen before. "That went well, I think," the older man said modestly. "It was powerful, Grandpa," Michael assured him. "Those young officers will remember your words for their entire careers." Their flight back to Nashville the next morning was nothing like their departure. The airline had upgraded them to first class without prompting. The TSA checkpoint staff treated James with pronounced respect, several asking quietly to shake his hand. As they settled into their seats, James gazed out the window at the Capitol receding below them. "Quite a week, wasn't it?" Michael nodded. "From being treated like a security threat to addressing the Naval Academy and meeting the President, all because you stood your ground with dignity." And because someone who understood history happened to be there, James added, referring to General Harris. That's why the stories matter, Michael. That's why they need to be passed along. Michael realized something in that moment. You know, Grandpa, I've never recorded your full story, not just Kisan, but everything. When we get home, I'd like to start doing that properly. James squeezed his grandson's hand. I'd like that too, son. There's more to tell than I realized. Back in Nashville, they were surprised to find a small, welcoming committee waiting at the airport, local veterans who had heard James's story and wanted to show their support. Among them was the airport's TSA director, who personally escorted them through security with profuse apologies for their previous experience. In the weeks that followed, the ripples from that day continued to spread. James received hundreds of letters from veterans and civilians alike, thanking him for his service and his dignity. Military publications ran features on his career. The viral video of the airport incident became a teaching tool for security agencies nationwide. General Harris called regularly, updating James on the progress of the new award established in his name and the changes being implemented in TSA training. Their unexpected friendship had become meaningful to both men, a bridge between military generations. Perhaps most significantly, Michael began recording his grandfather's stories systematically. Not just about Vietnam, but about growing up in segregated Memphis, about the challenges and triumphs of his military career, about the America he had seen transform over nearly 8 decades. 6 months later, James received an unexpected letter. It was from Officer Daniels, the TSA agent from the incident. Colonel Wilson, it read, I want to apologize personally for how I treated you and your Medal of Honor. There's no excuse for my failure to recognize its significance or to treat you with the respect you deserved. Since that day, I've learned about your service and sacrifice. The truth is, I never really understood what that medal meant before. I'm attending night classes now on American military history, and your story was part of our curriculum. I hope someday to have the opportunity to apologize to you in person and shake your hand properly. James read the letter twice, then handed it to Michael with a small smile. See, the stories matter. On Memorial Day, James was invited back to Washington to participate in ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery. Afterward, at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, he stood before the wall of names, finding those of friends lost decades ago. General Harris joined him there, both men silent for a long moment before the general spoke. Colonel, I wanted you to know that the first Colonel James Wilson Award will be presented next month. The recipient is a young Marine sergeant who pulled 2 wounded comrades to safety under fire in a recent deployment. She'll be the first woman to receive it. James nodded approvingly. The world keeps changing, General, sometimes for the better. As they walked slowly along the memorial wall, James reflected on the journey that had begun with that difficult moment at the Nashville airport. How a confrontation that might have remained a private indignity had instead become a catalyst for recognition, education, and perhaps even progress. You know, General, James said as they paused before the statue of 3 servicemen near the memorial, I've been thinking about what really happened that day at the airport. What do you mean, Colonel? That medal has always been heavy with meaning, but now it carries even more. Not just my story anymore, but all these connections it's created to you, to your uncle, to those midshipmen at Annapolis, even to Officer Daniels, as if its purpose has expanded somehow. General Harris considered this thoughtfully. Perhaps that's the true power of the Medal of Honor, Colonel, not just to recognize one person's courage, but to remind us all of what we aspire to be as a nation. James touched the medal on his chest, feeling its familiar weight. I think you might be right about that, General. As the 2 Marines continued their walk among the monuments to history and sacrifice, James Wilson carried his medal with renewed purpose, not just as a symbol of one night's courage in a distant war, but as a living connection to an ongoing American story. A story of imperfection and progress, of mistakes acknowledged and lessons learned, of dignity maintained in difficult moments, and of bridges built across generations. A story still being written with each new person who heard it and carried it forward. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.